I tried to introduce my affair at our office party, but it ended in an ambulance and police. Hey Reddit, this is my first time here. I have been an active reader on this app and have read a lot of stories here too. Honestly, my experience was heartbreaking, and I really didn't think that one day I would come here to share or ask for advice from you guys. It's been 3 weeks since I moved out of my husband's house, and it hasn't been easy on my end. I have been spending most of my time in the hospital and settling some issues with the cops. It's really a long story. I would try to go straight to the point and not waste much of your time. My name is Tyla, and my husband's name is Joe. We both are in our late 30s. Joe is 38, and I'm 37 years old. Joe and I have been married for about 8 years now. Well, we both don't have a child of our own yet. Joe and I have been trying to have a child, but it hasn't really yielded anything. We have also tested ourselves in different hospitals to know what actually was the problem, but we keep getting the same results, that we were both fine and medically fit. No. Joe and I have been happily married together for years, not until the pressure from his family to have a child made it depressing for me and made me lose my peace of mind. Most especially Joe's elder sister, Maria, and also Haley, Joe's mother. Maria seemed to be the one pressuring me the most. Despite the hate and bad comments from his siblings and family, Joe has been a supportive partner. Joe stood by me in every difficult moment. He always tried not to let his siblings look down on me or let the things they say get to me. Anytime I was feeling sad or depressed, Joe tried his best to light up my mood. My husband is one of the best things that has ever happened to me. Right now, I don't think I would be able to find any guy like Joe because he was a very nice guy, and looking at how things went downhill, I don't think he would have anything to do with me anymore. I terribly regretted all that I did, and I keep praying that my husband would have a change of mind and forgive me. I really want us to get back together. I missed my husband so much. I don't really know what got into me to cheat on my husband. Each day, I keep blaming myself for being stupid to have cheated on a man like my husband. He honestly doesn't deserve to be treated that way, considering how he took care of me and stood by me in my worst moments. I met Joe 10 years ago at Tammy's birthday party. Tammy and I are best friends. In fact, we were friends right from college. I met Joe there at her birthday party. It was our first time seeing each other. At that time, we both were still in college. Joe happened to be friends with Tammy's boyfriend, Paul. Tammy was pretty much close to Joe because Joe and Paul were best friends. They lived together throughout college. Most of the times I visited Tammy and Paul, I never for once met Paul because he was a busy type and was never at home. At a young age, Joe did side jobs like football coaching just for fun. He loved watching and playing football, and he wanted to train young minds who had the same passion as him. Anytime I visited, Tammy and Paul would always say nice things about Joe. Because of that, I fell head over heels for him even before I met him. What even surprised me the most was that Joe happened to be all what Tammy and Paul had told me about him from the beginning. His personality was real. In fact, I started visiting Paul's place often just so I could see who Joe was, but I never met him there. Also, I badly wanted to meet him then, to actually know if what Tammy and Paul had described him to be like was true. They didn't lie. Joe was handsome, and he was the type of guy every lady would want to be with, because he got almost all the qualities a lady looked for in a man. The only issue was that Joe wasn't a friendly type. At least not to everybody, only those he had close relationships with. So guys, each passing day, I kept trying to figure ways to meet Joe. Tammy and Paul, on the other hand, also tried to link us up, but Joe never had the time. At some point, it became frustrating, but then again, I kept my cool so it wouldn't look like I was desperate for a relationship with him. We were both single, and I was searching for a nice guy to settle down with. I couldn't say for Joe, but at that time, before we met it, seemed like a relationship was way out of his agenda. As fate would have it, we both met at Tammy's birthday party. That fateful day, I was told that Joe was going to be around. I was very excited. I made sure to dress well that day and look more presentable at the party, if not for anyone but for Joe, who I was about meeting up for the first time. Tammy could see the excitement on my face. She knew instantly that I had already fallen in love with Joe. It sounded so crazy and funny then. That day, I was really occupied. I was busy helping Tammy to put things in order, but along the line, Tammy and Paul were able to bring Joe and I to meet each other. Seeing Joe for the first time was one of my happiest moments. Immediately, I saw him. I knew that I was in for a lot of trouble because he was all what I had pictured him to look like. Joe also was happy to see me. He told me how he wasn't interested in what Paul was telling him about me, but wanted to get to see me. He was the type that was always busy and didn't have time for ladies, but somehow he liked me from the moment he saw me. Hearing these words from Joe made me excited even more. Joe and I talked for the rest of the party. It was as if we had known each other for a very long time. The connection between us was very strong. When it was time to dance, Joe asked me for a dance, which I accepted wholeheartedly. Somehow our dance caught the attention of everyone present in the hall. Everyone was cheering us up, and we both went with the flow. Joe had a lot of dancing skills, and I was also able to match with it. We stole the dance floor that night. When the party was over, everyone began to leave in their numbers. I was too tired that night and wanted to go home. Joe proposed to see me off, but I declined. We both exchanged contacts, promising to check more on each other often. After that party, Joe and I really became very close. The only time we had the chance to talk for long hours on the phone was during the nighttime because Joe did not have time during the daytime. We started off as friends. We shared a lot of things about ourselves with each other, our past life experiences and childhood memories. It was always fun chatting with Joe. Somehow Joe and I began going on dates together. We also went to the coaching field together. I was the first lady he had ever taken to see him do what he loved. In fact, I was the first lady Joe had ever dated. He didn't have time to go on dates because he loved keeping himself busy with what he loved doing rather than going on dates, and also thought not every lady would understand it. Joe wasn't in to explain himself also, and so he didn't try dating. But somehow I was able to be comfortable with his lifestyle. I didn't even complain about it. I understood him perfectly, and he also did understand me. After some time, Joe asked me to be his girlfriend, which I accepted without any hesitation. Our relationship was very nice. Joe didn't give me any hard time. He made relationships very easy for me and didn't give me any stress. We dated for about 5 months. The rest of the time we had in college was very fun. Joe and I spent time together and made memories together. Things really moved fast. Before we knew it, we graduated from college. 1 year after graduation, we got married. The fun part of it was that Joe and I got married together with Tammy and Paul on the same day. We planned within ourselves to marry on the same day with our best friends. It was so memorable. After Joe and I got married, we moved into a new neighborhood, not too far away from our family, so we could get to see each other at any time. But this decision was one of the worst mistakes we've ever made as a couple. Joe's mother and sisters kept on visiting more often. We didn't have any privacy as a couple. My husband also complained about it and warned his sisters to reduce the way they visited, but it didn't work out. I was so frustrated, but I kept my cool. It got worse after our 3rd wedding anniversary. That was when the pressure of getting pregnant to have a child began. Joe's sisters kept calling me all sorts of names. I never hid it from Joe. I told him everything. He wasn't happy with the way I was being pressured, and so we made plans to move out to somewhere far away from them. Joe and I moved into a new city. My husband wanted us to be alone together and be free from his sister's constant visits and hurtful comments about me. I couldn't be happier than this. I so much loved the way Joe treated me. He didn't treat me like just his wife, but like his everything. It's safe to say that he loved me more than I loved him. When the news of my infidelity broke out, Joe's sisters didn't hesitate to come over to mock me. They teamed up together because of me. Maria even gave me a very hot slap across my face for cheating on their brother and having the nerve to even introduce my affair partner at our office party. They seized all the stuff my husband bought for me, including the cars and jewelry. I keep blaming myself for giving them the hand to do all those things they did to me. If I didn't cheat, they wouldn't have dared to lay a finger on me. Joe stood there and watched his sisters maltreat me. He couldn't stand up for me like he used to because I cheated on him. What even got him angry the most was that I was going out with my colleague at work. That pissed him so much to the extent that my presence irritated him. Joe couldn't stay in the same room with me for 5 minutes. He felt suffocated. I was very sad to see my husband getting uncomfortable because of my presence. He chased me out of the house and warned me not to dare show up my face. The hate my husband now has for me is making me go crazy. I really regretted cheating on him. Like I said earlier, my affair partner was my colleague at work. His name is Walter. He is 37 years old. When my husband and I first moved into the city, I needed to find something to do so as to not be idle. My husband fully supported the idea and we began seeking jobs. My husband also helped me with the writing of emails. Joe was very good at that. Most of the emails we submitted were turned down because they needed a skilled person for the position I was applying for. Was I frustrated during those times? Yes, I was. I totally lost hope, but my husband kept encouraging me. We continued applying for jobs until I was finally able to secure one. Guys, not just one job, but 3 at a time. 3 companies reached out to me wanting to hire me. I was left to decide on which one to choose. I was happy, but at the same time confused. I asked my husband to help me pick anyone. Joe told me to choose the one I most preferred and would be happy doing it. Well, it did take me about 4 days before I was able to pick one out of the 3 options I had. Trust me, I sure made the best decision. The job was less stressful compared to the other ones, and the pay was great. Imagine working less hours and being paid handsomely. As much as I made the best decision picking that one, it also had a great disadvantage. Most especially to me. I became so relaxed and forgot what actually brought me there. When I resumed, I had difficulties getting used to the environment and how to go about the work process. My first 6 months were not so amazing. It was very stressful. It wasn't as I had imagined it to be when I picked it, but along the line I was able to meet up through the help of my colleague, Walter. Walter was more experienced than me. Most times he noticed how I find it difficult to get some work done, and so he offered to put me through. At least he was more friendly than the rest of my colleagues. Let's forget, guys, I worked at a marketing firm, but right now I'm jobless and don't have anything to do right now. Walter began schooling me. Most times he usually used his lunch period to put me through on how to go about some little things that looked difficult but yet simple. Also, most times my boss yelled at me because of some mistakes I made. I felt so embarrassed having been yelled at by someone I was far older than. I couldn't do or say much because he was my boss, and I needed the penny he was going to pay me after all. I was able to improve through the help of Walter. Hadn't been Walter not come to my rescue then, I would have quit the job a long time for my own peace of mind. With time, I got used to the environment and how the system worked. Walter became not only my colleague, but the closest person to me at work. We became best friends and went on lunch break together. We were so close to the extent our colleagues started suspecting us to be going out together. Walter and I ignored all the cheap gossip and continued doing our thing. On several occasions, we were seen outside work together in eateries or public places. Most of my colleagues didn't know about my marital status. I kept it away from them not because I had the intention of cheating on my husband, but because I didn't want anybody to intrude into my personal life. Walter was the only one that knew about it because I told him about it, and he promised to keep it a secret. I knew I could trust him. Along the line, what seemed like a rumor was true. Walter and I developed feelings for each other. At first I thought it was just normal since we both were so close together. Walter seemed much interested in me, but I didn't give in to any of the advances he made towards me. I turned him down, but he never backed down. Eventually I gave in. It happened when we both were sent for a business trip together to another city. The trip was to last just 3 days, but ended up staying a week. The night we arrived at the hotel, we discovered that there was only one room to lodge because the hotel was fully booked. Walter and I had no choice but to share the room together. The first 2 days were quite uncomfortable for me, but I got used to it. We agreed on facing what brought us there and not to be distracted, but we couldn't keep up to that agreement. On the 4th day of the trip, Walter asked me to go out, which I agreed. The bond between us was very strong. The night he asked me out, we made out. Yes, guys, it happened that fast. I didn't regret it because it was something we both needed at that time, most especially me. The weather was just perfect for it. I did feel shy after what had happened between us. After that day, Walter and I started going on official dates together. I know you all would want to know about Walter's status, right? Well, at that time, Walter was single and wasn't in any relationship. After the trip was over, Walter and I went back home together. We were given a 3-day work leave to rest. We spent the break together at Walter's home. Throughout the period Walter and I were together, I didn't bring him to my house because my husband was always around. Anything we wanted to do was done at Walter's place. My husband also never suspected anything because he knew how demanding my job was. I used my job as a cover-up to spend time with Walter. This went on for about a year. The relationship was just baseless and meaningless. We were only catching a cruise with each other. I didn't fall out of love with my husband. In fact, I was still in love with him when Walter and I were dating. Life just happened, and I cheated. Maybe I wasn't thinking straight then, but right now, I regret it with the whole of me. So guys, Walter and I resumed back to work after our work leave and made a report on how the trip turned out. Of course, it was a business trip. Giving feedback was very important, at least in my own field of work. The report was done during one of the meetings we usually had every morning. Our boss was indeed impressed by it. After the meeting, my boss made an official announcement. He announced the annual office party that is usually done in the company just so to ease the work stress. The party was another way of bringing everyone to bond together and have healthy relationships aside from work. It was a time to party and have as much fun as you want. We usually had a color code, but this year the theme was different, which was an off-white party. After the announcement, everybody went about their business. Walter and I met that day after work hours as usual. We talked about a lot of things like having to go to the party, not just as co-workers, but as couples. We wanted to spice things up and see how it's going to look. Since none of my colleagues know about my marital status except Walter, I was relaxed. Walter kept asking me if I liked the idea of us announcing our relationship to our colleagues, which I accepted. Well, looking at it right now, that was the biggest mistake I have ever made in my life. Maybe I wasn't thinking straight then. I was very naive and stupid. Going to the party and introducing another man as my husband while I was still married was one of the dumbest things ever. The period I was having an affair with Walter, I thought my husband had no clue, but I was mistaken. Joe just pretended like he knew nothing and was waiting to catch me red-handed. How he got to know about it and the way he did was something I didn't see coming. I honestly thought I was smart enough, but he outsmarted me. The week of the party, I informed my husband about it, which he approved. Like I said earlier, this year's party was different from the ones we had. This year we were allowed to bring a +1 to the party. Everyone planned on bringing their partner, but I didn't, and that was the beginning of trouble for me. I honestly thought my husband had no idea about it because he wasn't a staff there or had any person working there other than me. I was the biggest fool to think that. I didn't know that my husband had information and knew most of the things going on there, especially my inappropriate friendship with Walter. The day I informed him of going to the party, he casually asked who I was attending the party with, but I said no one because there wasn't room for +1. He nodded in disbelief, but I didn't understand it then. The funniest thing was that my husband helped me out in picking an outfit for the event. He even went as far as bringing a lot of options home for me to choose from because one of his closest friends owned a boutique. When I was done picking, he paid for it and had the rest sent back. At that time, I was very much excited. I thought my husband was being caring like he used to do, but I didn't know that he was just setting a very big trap for me. The day of the party came. I was one of the happiest people because I was going to introduce my boyfriend to my colleague at the party. My husband could see the excitement on my face. He asked if everything was okay because the excitement was too much and didn't know what was making me to be that excited. I told him not to worry, that everything was fine. He agreed and didn't press further. That day before it was time for the party, Walter and I went on a spa date together just to look fresh and glowing. The party was going to start by 7 p.m. in the evening that day. Going on a spa date wasn't a bad idea. From there, we went home to prepare for the main event. The time of the party came and I got dressed. When I was about heading out, my husband was not around. He told me he was going to hang out with his friends. So I left home and went over to Walter's place so we could go together. We both arrived there holding hands together and smiling. Immediately we stepped inside, everyone began staring at us and making side comments, but we didn't say a word. Some minutes into the party, my boss made a toast officially opening the party. After the toast, Walter and I signed each other to announce our relationship. We called the attention of everyone present. Before you know it, we had everyone's attention. I decided to do the talking. I talked about how our colleagues suspected us to have something going on between us. I also told that all that they had been saying about us was true, that we were officially dating. Everyone was surprised and started cheering us up. Walter came closer to me and we kissed. Our colleagues continued cheering. At that moment, someone kept clapping even when the audience had stopped. Immediately, we got disengaged to see who it was. Guys, I got the biggest surprise of my life. Guess who it was? It was my husband. Yes, my husband was the one clapping. Joe finished clapping, came closer, and gave Walter a slap. Walter was surprised and tried to confront him, but Joe punched him hard on the face. Before I could understand what was going on, these two men were fighting with each other and were bleeding profusely. No one in the hall could stop them. My colleagues called the cops and ambulance to come because the situation was messy. Both Walter and Joe were badly wounded. Walter was conscious and Joe was bleeding through his nose. They were both taken to the hospital for treatment. I had to follow them because both men clashed because of me. We got to the hospital and they were both attended to. Walter's situation got pretty worse and he had to stay in the hospital a little longer. My husband had a minor injury, so he was treated and quickly discharged, but he still had to pay for attacking Walter first. While in the hospital, Joe wouldn't let me talk to him or come close to him. I tried pleading with him to forgive me, but he wouldn't listen. At that moment, I was very scared. I knew that I was in a very bad and messy situation. I badly wanted to see Walter and know how he was doing, but the doctors told me not to go in until after a few hours so he could rest. The cops were still around the hospital wanting to know what actually happened and waiting for Walter to regain consciousness so we all could write a statement. I was very depressed. I kept on crying and praying that the situation would not get any worse than it was. While waiting for Walter to wake up, Joe made some phone calls. From how he sounded, I knew he was calling his family, and mine, also telling them what had happened that night. Not long after, my phone started buzzing. A lot of calls and messages were coming in. I had to turn off my phone because I wasn't in the right frame of mind to talk to anyone. Joe also called our family lawyer in my presence to process the divorce papers because he was going to divorce me after leaving the hospital and settling things with the cops. On hearing that from him, I became so restless. Knowing that my marriage had crumbled in seconds made me depressed. The next day, Walter had regained consciousness, and we were allowed to see him. Joe refused to go there because he told me that he would do something worse than the beating he gave him. I rushed inside and saw Walter feeling better than the previous night. I was relieved and was happy that he was out of danger. Later the next day, he was discharged and was free to go. His situation wasn't that serious anymore since he had woken up. He was given prescriptions and was asked to take his meds. From there, the three of us were taken to the police station to write down our statement. We got to the station and gave our statement. Our family lawyer was around, and Walter's lawyer was also around. It took a while before everything was finally settled. At the end of the day, Joe and Walter were asked to pay for damages, else he would be sued to court. There was a lot of evidence to sue Joe and Walter to court. They had no option than to pay for the damages. When the issue was finally settled, we were freed to go back home. My husband immediately stood up and left me at the station. Walter also asked me not to go close to him because he didn't want any more trouble. I tried pleading with him to hear what I had to say, but he gave me deaf ears. I was stranded at the station and didn't know how to get back home. The distance from the station to my house was too much. I had no option than to walk back home on foot under a scorching sun. After a few hours, I was able to get home, but was very tired and restless. On entering inside, I met my luggages thrown outside. After seeing my things outside, I knocked and called Joe to open the door for me. Once the door was opened, I saw Joe's sisters standing in front of me. They started laughing. Immediately they saw me. I ignored them and tried entering inside, but they pushed me out, and Maria had the audacity to try slapping me. Her sister was the one that stopped her from slapping me. I couldn't believe that I was being treated like trash in my own husband's house. It was just so unbelievable. I waited in high hopes for Joe to come outside, and when he finally did, all he could say was to ask me to leave the house. I tried pleading with him, but he turned his back on me. I started crying while hoping that my tears would make him change his mind, but he still ignored me and went back inside. His sisters were not even helping matters at all. They asked me to leave the compound peacefully, else they would invite the neighbors over, and that would be more disgraceful. After telling me that, they slammed the door on my face. At that moment, I knew that I was finished. I didn't know where to go. After much thought, I concluded on going to Walter's place. I felt that he would have pity on me and let me into his house, so I packed my luggages and headed to his house. I was still stranded and had no money on me to call a cab that could take me there. The distance was not that much, but my luggage were more than 2, and so it was very difficult for me. But I was still able to manage there on foot. I finally got to his place after an hour. I thought he would take me back, but I was mistaken. I really regretted going there. He told me that he wanted absolutely nothing to do with me, and that I was the reason he ended up in prison. I still can't believe how my life has changed so much and how I'm just getting embarrassed all the time. Update. Hey Reddit, it's me again. It's been a month and a week now. I'm sorry for taking so long in updating you guys about what happened. Before I start, I would like to thank you all for your patience and advice. I honestly didn't expect to receive such an amount of comments on my last post. I received both good and bad advice, and also got a lot of negative comments. Anyway, I'm grateful. Like most of you have predicted, my marriage with Joe has ended. We both signed the divorce papers, and we went our separate ways. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks after the police case. I tried everything I could think of to make Joe have a rethink about his decision, but it was useless. His mind was made up, and his sisters worsened the situation by making him feel like he made the right choice. My husband believed his sisters more than me, the same people that wanted to drift us apart because we couldn't have a child. I still couldn't believe that he would one day listen to them over me. I went over to the house almost every day to plead with my husband, but I couldn't get through him. The way Joe ignored me really got on my nerves, and at some point I just had to give up and sign the divorce papers. Before signing it, I reflected on everything that happened. I couldn't find what Joe did to me that made me cheat on him. I realized that I had just been stupid and was carried away by lust. I cried my eyes out that night. I knew nothing was going to change his mind. I signed the divorce papers and sent it to him through our family lawyer. Joe became my past. I know you all would be wondering what happened between me and Walter. Well, it didn't work out. Going over to his house was a bad idea. He humiliated me in front of his neighbors and didn't let me in. I have never been embarrassed like that in my entire life before. Walter had the audacity to humiliate me to the extent his neighbors started making mockery of me. He threw me out of his house with my luggages on the streets. Walter warned me never to show up at his place again, else he would call the security to throw me out and beat me up. I left his house humiliated. I really regretted showing my face at his place. I should have looked for a place on the street to stay, rather than going over to his house and facing that kind of humiliation from him. After having his way with me, he dared to call me a cheap woman. So all that we had meant nothing to him. I was so stupid to think the feelings he had for me were real. Update. I'm here to give you guys the final update on everything that happened after the divorce and the humiliation from Walter. Well, we learn every day, but I learnt my own lesson in a very hard way. It's been 2 months since Joe and I got divorced. Has life been easy for me? No, it hasn't. I have finally come to the conclusion that I destroyed my life and everything I had with my own hands. I lost both my marriage and job. The night Joe and Walter got into a heated fight, a lot of things were destroyed. The tables, chairs, and walls were damaged. The bills were given to my boss, and he asked Walter and I to pay for the damages because we worked under him. The expenses cost a huge amount of money, and I was given the biggest share. I used my last savings to pay up the damages. After everything, my boss suspended both Walter and I indefinitely. After a week later, we were both sacked from work. Right now, I'm jobless and don't have anything to do. I later discovered that my husband and boss were high school mates. That was how my husband was able to catch me red-handed. I also learned that the business trip was a big trap for Walter and I. What even shocked me the most was that my husband and boss went with us to the business trip, but kept themselves hidden. They took pictures of Walter and I in an inappropriate position. All the places we went together were being monitored. My husband wanted to catch me red-handed, and so he used the office party as the perfect place. That was why my boss told us to bring a +1 when coming. It was just a big trap, and I stupidly fell for it. My ex-husband really outsmarted me, and I didn't see it coming. His silence during that period made me think that he was gullible and knew nothing. I didn't know that I was being played and was the big fool here. I honestly didn't have any idea that my ex-husband and boss knew each other. My boss had me closely watched when everyone started suspecting Walter and I. Learning all of this made me feel so ashamed of myself. I really regret everything, and I cannot believe that I let myself be used in such a way. If I had stayed loyal to my husband, none of this would have happened.